Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast presented by Greatest Ultimate Bag. I'm Dan Hilton and he's Matt Pippin Auletta. And after a week off, a little break for you and I, we are really in the home stretch now. So I feel like, Matt, just like the Empire are doing, we really need to give our best effort today.
Yeah, they are certainly gearing up at the right time. I mean, they talked about how they were happy with the schedule and they knew it was going to lead to, needing to be their best moving into the playoffs. And it certainly seems like that's the version of the team we're getting. They are looking great.
Well, we're talking, of course, when you say looking great, about first the Friday matchup in Minnesota against the Minnesota Wind Chill, a 25-16 victory that, as you said, does prepare them for what will be the second half of our show, and that is previewing the big matchup. And we're going to go through all the permutations of the playoff scenarios and all that in a second here. But let's start with that Minnesota victory. And the player we begin with the New York Empire. And I know we'll do O-line, D-line, and bigger ideas, but Oliver Chartock. This is the first time this season, I feel like, that we've said his name first, which again, there are 20 players on the team, so there are other players that have other roles. But this was, as I said a few weeks ago, there was a Jeff Holm game. There's been multiple, I think, Charles Weinberg games. There's been an Oliver Chartock game. There's been Ben Jagt games. But this one was the Oliver Chartock game with 6 goals, 1 assist, a +6, 241 receiving yards, 400 exactly total yards, and 1 hat trick as well. Who cares about that turnover there? But as much as Oliver had such a great day, to me, it started with that first point. The goals came so easy for him as Jagt and Jagt, because Jagt was also fantastic with 3 goals and 2 assists, but Jagt and Jagt seemed to really attract a ton of the game plan attention. And by the fourth score of the game, Oliver, other than the break, had 3 of the first 4 goals for the Empire, said with the other one being a break. And they all kind of came from either the back of the stack on the continuation, or they came from him resetting to the middle on the sideline and then just kind of, while the rest of the stack cleared farther to the other side, they just let Ollie go to work in the middle of the lane there, and Oliver's in the end zone. And those really simple O-line points that came against Salt Lake and the Wind Chill are those the Empire going forward, with how simple now the O-line seems to feel with one another, even when you're changing out pieces like no John Randolph this week, no Jeff Holm this week, and then Marquez Brownlee not for the D-line. But even when missing pieces, it seems like the team, all 26 players that in theory right now could be in the 20, seem to be all vibing and understanding the concepts that maybe they were new to in the start of the season when you were really replacing Ryan Osgar and Jeff Babbitt. It does feel like a new version of the Empire, and they finally got comfortable with who they needed to be this season.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Everything just looks easier the last few weeks. The offense is playing like a championship caliber offense. Sure, there are a few hiccups here and there. It's not quite as amazing as previous seasons, but like you said, you're replacing 2 MVP world-class caliber players. So there were always going to be some hiccups, or you weren't going to operate at quite the crazy level of efficiency. But they are still just easy. It's easy. Oliver Chartock was amazing. And if you asked me what he did, I would just say, I don't know, he just played really well. That's it. I don't even there's no amazing plays. It felt like walking around in the right space. It was just easy. I mean, it reminded me of Jeff scoring a bunch of easy goals last year. He just found space and there he was. So, I mean, when a team is functioning that well, that's championship level play, and that's what we need to see from them at this point in the season. And on the flip side of that, Minnesota looked great when they were gunning and everything seemed to be working out. Even when they were, throwing it into coverage, they came down with a few. But in the long run, that is really not indicative of championship level play. You can take the deep shots when they're there, but that's not going to work game after game after game against the top 3 or 4 teams in the league. It's just absolutely not going to work. You can get some deep shots in motion when it works out, sure, but they just, as we saw in the second half, it just stopped working.
Yeah, I also find that options here in this game and versatility have been really important to watching the Empire hit their apex at the right time, if you want to call it that, because Matt LaBar played O-line in this game. And I think in our heads, of course, he's a D-line player, but we've seen him flirt a bit more with that O-line quite a bit. And in that game, he played the most O points, I believe, of the season with 17, just played D points. And then Ethan Thornton played 8 O points and 7 D points, while Elliott, for the first time this season, moved over to the D line quite a bit with 12 O line points for him and then 9 D line points. And
Yeah, they
when
just
we do
flipped
talk
him in and
exactly, and so when we talk about the ways that players can be flipped in and flipped out, there's two versions of that, right? We're playing with matchups and throwing players around because we're trying to problem solve. Like we have an issue that we're trying to fix, so we're throwing personnel in different places to see if we can solve that problem. And then we are confident with 10 to 12 players playing certain O-line points that now we can actually throw a wrinkle at the defense by changing personnel around and doing different things. Because again, Elliott with his hucking became an asset in the game against Minnesota. And especially when we speak about hucking, as you mentioned, to me, that was the one big key. And I talked to Anthony Nunez. So, by the way, congratulations to Anthony on the big 50 win, which unfortunately, and this is a shout to the Watch UFA, I know they have a lot on their plate right now, but in the future, in this offseason, I always like to sprinkle in little suggestions, something that catalogs, if we can, the coaching records and kind of going through some of the history of the coaches. The stats page is wonderful to figure out every player over time and all that stuff. But I would love to see the different coaches and how his 50 wins stack up, because I don't know how many in the franchise histories, not in the Empire, but I mean of all these coaches around the league have hit 50 wins. So congratulations to him. But talking to him, the Hucks were the key to the game for him, and he felt like the defense certainly executed. The Empire were 7 of 8 on their Hucks for 88%. The only Huck was that Empire missed was on the third point of the game with that miscommunication between Elliott and Jagt, which is, again, not something you expect to be a theme with those two, Elliott and Jagt. And then on the other side, the wind chill, they were 7 of 9 in the first half on their Hucks, and then 1 of 8 in the second half. And just coming off that D3 title as college teammates at St. Olaf, young players in Will Brandt and Gordon Larson, really fantastic players. Larson, huge in this game, 4 goals, 5 assists. But they kind of let the wind chill know that, hey, maybe you feel like you have that, and then it just wasn't working for them. And Minnesota did not then figure out how to not throw the deep ball because they felt like he was there, and then it wasn't. And then all of a sudden, they're down by 6.
If you look back at the last 2 Empire championships and the Carolina championship in between, all of those teams rolled through the playoffs with, sure, some deep shots. They're not allergic to it, but they did it by just playing patient when they needed to. And Minnesota did not exhibit pretty much any of that throughout the course of the game. And even Atlanta, when they beat New York in the beginning of the season, we had said here on the show that was the most patient I'd ever seen that offense. They just took their time, they moved it, and they still shot deep plenty. They just did it at the right time in the right space against the right matchups. And Minnesota just eventually did not do that at all.
Yeah, and I think the different styles that we also speak around the league, and that's what makes that trio, we'll say it again, the trio of the Breeze, the Glory, and the Empire. That's what makes those teams so dangerous, is that they do have weapons to take you deep if that's where the game goes. But all 3 of those offenses and even those defenses are comfortable playing against different styles. And that's what makes, I think, the Empire so good out of their division, even.
Yeah.
And when you talk about some of the other D-line players who've kind of been getting better and better over the course of this year, we talked about him last week. I'll say it again. Angel Olchese went from, is he going to make the 20 coming down from Boston? And, I even had a conversation with him early in the preseason about living in Boston. And he wasn't sure if I'm not in the 20, it's going to be more difficult to get down, right? Is it worth it even coming down all the way from Boston to stand on the sideline, which is a lot different than just being another kind of player who's local to stand on the sideline, right? So if I'm not in the 20, you really do ask those big questions. And for Angelo, he's worked his way, been at every practice that he could get to, and has worked his way into the 20. Same thing with Bobby Elson, just coming back recently. On that second D-line, that was the first break of the game. They were really patient. They made good decisions, and they worked the disc up for the first Empire break. And then you're allowed, even with no John Randolph, Sam Jonas has been fantastic now, both against Salt Lake and Minnesota, working the disc up and becoming more and more comfortable as a handler. But we also knew, now that kind of the lid is off, that everyone kind of knows what Sam Jonas is. He's such a great athlete that you could even see at that first tryout that he's such a great athlete. And he's one of those players that can come into the league. And because he's such a good athlete, the wide UFA field fits him. where a lot of players go, and we'll see this with the Breeze. They play, as Thomas Edmonds recently said on that podcast with the Colorado guys, the Breeze do play kind of a club style defense on a UFA field. And for the Empire, having a player and an athlete, not even player, but an athlete like Sam Jonas does allow you to, we'll say, kind of mix and match a little bit. And I think that's also what you see with Atlanta. Atlanta just has so many gigantic, tall, big athletes who are also fast, and that allows them to play, we'll say UFA style more with a lot of switching and worrying about that kind of stuff. And that's why, even though the Empire don't have a Jeff Babbitt, I think they've fine-tuned and they figured out how to add the players that do have teams thinking twice about the deep ball, and they've added them to their second D line, and they make you think about it more than even their 20 might have at the start of the season. But as much as I feel like we always, Matt, talk about the pressure that those handler defenders, especially Marquez and Josue, both who were unavailable for this game, we talk about the pressure that's put on those handlers and Axel Agami Contreras. But this time around, I do want to talk about those downfield cutter defenders, because they seem to be rounding into form at the right time too.
The defense is playing well. That's a certainty. But I was most impressed that when they were given the opportunity to play offense, the defensive units just looked so good. I don't think the Empire team maybe ever has had D units that move the disc that well. I feel like, sometimes the disc moves well, and it has in previous years. I just feel like every D-liner seemed very capable of just breaking the mark, moving the disc, hitting little tighter windows than you would expect some D-liners to make at times. And that offense looked so good. Olcheze was just, he marshaled the offense on a pretty long D point. We're getting just, around breaks that open up space, and they're scoring in similar fashion to the O-line, just like relatively easy looks. A few are a little blady, like around to Ryan Drost or whatever, but that's when you find the space and you make that throw super easy. One of those throws felt like it was in the air for 8 seconds, and Ryan caught it, and there was still no one near him. So that's just the level of ease at which they're scoring with is also impressive now.
Yeah, D-line conversion percentage was 69%, 11 of 16. They were 11 of 27 on their break chances. And break percentage, 41% for that. And then the Empire, again, 17 of 20 in the red zone. 5 blocks for either team, but the turnovers was the big one, that they forced Minnesota into turnovers. It was 20-10 in that category, and the Empire still taking care of the disc there. And there was also moments in the game where I think the Empire, that game had the potential to get a little muddy, and it did. It was definitely really chippy. Antoine and DeClerc jawing early. There was also some really good, I want to compliment the integrity calls from Minnesota. Yeah. The Empire probably had one or two that I think could have gone either way for them if they had enacted integrity on their own, but they felt like the fouls were fair. And then there was little things as well that helped. It said first point of the game. I think it was an offside. They got the Empire started, that O-line really comfortable at midfield. And then the drop pull was really helpful to make that game 7-4, where it could have just as easily been 6-5, but instead it's 7-4, and then an easy score at the front cone after that drop pull. And again, now it's 7-4, and the Empire were able to, in all the moments where the Minnesota wind chill could have come back in the game, they just had that resolve. It seemed like champions, or a lot of players who've been on championship teams in the past for the Empire took that breath and said, all right, we're going to let Antoine get into the trash talk. And you could say there was some talking, but by and large, I think players kind of just kept their head. And Minnesota's own Ben Yacht, Charles Weinberg, there wasn't even a moment from those two. They were just calm, composed, and the Empire felt like they were getting the job done. And I think that is really what you want to see from this team.
Yeah. You could see in the background on occasion, Yacht was smiling at some of the Minnesota players when they made particularly nice throws or plays. So it seemed things were copacetic out there. It was nice. While we're on the subject of the integrity or just kind of like fair play or whatever, one thing I feel like it's worth mentioning for people who listen, I hate to drag him, but I feel like it's necessary. Matthias Ling, over the course of the season, has had what I feel like a compiling list of bad bids. And the bid, he just dove straight into somebody's side, like pretty much after he was already caught, like into the side, into the legs. And I just hate to see that. It's nonsense and it's garbage. And he's a very good athlete. And, I get the hustle and the energy and, trying to put it all out there, but you got to clean that up. It's just awful. I mean, I said this a few weeks ago, I think to you, just like when we weren't recording either before or after the show, it was like another bad bid. And now there's another one. And, fortunately no one's really gotten hurt, but that's nonsense and it's got to stop. I hate it.
Well, we're talking about cleaning things up, and the Empire have been really clean recently, and the DC Breeze have been really clean recently. And I think that game, when we're talking about the concept of cleaning it up, transitions perfectly into the game against the Breeze.
Wow, you just skirting the issue.
I let you say what you need to say. I like Matthias, but I totally agree with you that
I have no problem with any of these people as humans. Those bids are bad. No. Those bids are bad. I don't like to see it.
Completely agree. No, people can see I've got a little bit of tan. I was at my own little tournament this weekend in the hot sun. And as you know, again, when you hit your 30s, when those college kids and young players are, diving around my ankles and knees, I could say I had my little say for a young individual this weekend when he was a bit too close to me for comfort. And no, yeah, it's really frustrating. And especially with a wide field like that, you just got to have a little more sense to it. So we're hoping, Matthias, clean it up, and we know you'll be just fine, and a young player is going to figure those things out. All right, so
enough said.
Hey, Ryan. Have you ever thought to yourself how you could fit everything you need for one weekend into a single bag?
And there's an incredible layout block.
Oh, there's a Callahan. Mike Dross did it for New York.
From cleats to jerseys to discs, pennies, water bottles, the greatest bag can help.
And this is going to be a greatest here.
This is going to be a Callahan for Ryan Drost.
Thanks to Greatest Bag for being a sponsor of the New York Empire.
Now I can transition into the Breeze. All right, so let's talk about the Breeze, actually beginning with a young player on their team in Elliot Benet, because he's in that first matchup against the Empire. I think he was okay, but Cole Jurek was really the star, and Cole Jurek had just been fantastic for them on both sides of the disc. And for the Breeze, they've also, with Elliot Benet, only played 8 games because he was at the Windmill tournament, as well as many of the other Empire players. And I would recommend, there's a WatchUFA.com article by Marissa Kleckner about the recruitment of Bonet, because all of the stories from some of the big new faces on different teams, that being Liam Haberfield for the Empire that we've talked about, and Bonet for the Breeze, and then Toby DeCrane for Montreal. So the way Bonet arrived to DC is that last fall, I should say, in Huntington Beach, California, at the World Beach Ultimate Championships, Bonet wanted to get Rowan McDonald's jersey, as many do. Jersey swapping, especially, I want to say those who don't follow soccer or football, if you will, that jersey swapping is a big deal in that sport, a little more than it is here in like American sports. And so being from France, I think Bonet was like, yeah, swap jersey, Rowan McDonald, that's the guy, I want his jersey. And if you remember right, Rowan McDonald was wearing the jersey of injured teammate Jimmy Mickle because something had happened. Like either he left his jersey at home. I don't remember exactly. I don't want to call out Rowan and his responsibility with his jerseys, but for some reason, Rowan didn't have his jersey in Huntington Beach. And by the time it would get there, it was not going to be in time. So he takes the injured player in Jimmy Mickle. So Bonet could then not exchange his jersey with Rowan. So instead, they exchanged phone numbers, and the rest is history, because now Elliot Bonet winds up arriving with DC because of the phone number exchange. And maybe he was going to be a jersey and a phone number, but either way, that led to Elliot Bonet arriving, and he has been so good, so important to them as a young player. And I think because of his versatility, he's somebody that you game plan. But the Breeze is so interesting too, because you don't necessarily game plan for, in the way that what Minnesota, you do game plan for Matt Rader because you worry about a guy like him. But for DC, you kind of just game plan for the whole team because they have a style, they have a system, and they all play as cogs in that machine. And again, Cole Jurek, Elliot Bonet, AJ Merriman, and Tyler Monroe, Rowan McDonald, Johnny Mulks, Troy Holland. I mean, which player is going to pop off or which player is going to be the one to hurt you? It could be all of them, and you're not really sure which one is going to be the star in that game.
Yeah, DC definitely has one of the most distinct styles. I mean, the small ball with, the opportunistic shots at times. And, last time New York and DC played, we did not have a full strength Empire team. That was a few fill-ins. There was Tristan Yarder, Murphy, some young guys, just people who probably will not be in the 20s, for this final week and into the playoffs. Fine players, but not quite the top level of the team here. So I'm excited to see all of these matchups and how this game plays out. And, the game matters. I mean, if DC wins, do they 100% lock up first, even if Boston wins both their games because they have the better point diff? Is that right?
All right, let's do this.
right.
I've got this, and I knew you were going to say that, so I wrote it down, and you're going to see my eyes are now directly. I'm just going to read the page. So Boston this weekend on the road against Toronto and Montreal. Montreal was one red zone completion away from taking down Boston already this month. So this is not entirely done and dusted that Boston is going to get the 1 seed. It's also a night start on Saturday at Toronto, which is likely going to be a win. No offense, Rush. But then Saturday at 1 p.m. on Sunday, 1 p.m. on Sunday the next day. So they've got a
rest.
Against Montreal and have to get to Montreal. And we know that there's wind in that stadium and all that stuff. So I think if you're looking for a Montreal-Boston upset, these are all the circumstances for that to occur. But we'll see if Boston can, arguably, after that win over the Empire and that winning over the DC Breeze, this is the third most important game in their franchise's history against Montreal. So let's see, that'll test their mettle. So let's say they do win both of those games. It is possible that all three of these teams, if Boston loses to Montreal, would all three of these teams then finish with a 9-3 record if Empire were to beat DC? And then it would have the exact same head-to-head record as well. And if you're the Empire, that means that the goal is very simple here. Beat DC by 3 goals or more, and then do put your faith in Montreal and hope that at least one of the Canadian teams do their job. That is the Empire's pathway to first place. But even if the Empire, if they beat DC by 2, that means that the head-to-head record all the way across the board is exactly even. And those are permutations that are above my pay grade that I don't want to have to worry about yet. So again, if the Empire beat DC by 3 or more and Montreal were to beat Boston, that is how the Empire gets the 1 seed. I believe, Boston just gets the 1 seed based on record if they just win out against Toronto and Montreal. And then the Breeze would get the 2 seed if they beat the Empire, they're definitely getting the 2 seed. And they could definitely get the 2 seed, obviously, if Boston were to lose to Montreal and DC beats the Empire, because on head-to-head records, that means that the 2 wins over the Empire would propel them to first.
If DC beats New York and Boston wins both their games, they're both 10-2, correct?
Yes.
So do you know who would be the 1 seed there in that situation?
I believe it would come down to head-to-head by how much the Breeze would have beaten the Empire by. I think that still matters.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So anyway, the games are not meaningless by any stretch, because if I'm any of these teams, I imagine I want to be first. I want to avoid the tough play-in game for the East Division Championship. So the game's certainly not meaningless. If you lose, not a huge deal. You get some time to retool, reevaluate, whatever. But yeah, I expect we'll be getting a good game out of DC, New York.
Well, I think part of the most interesting thing that would occur with DC and Empire would be the actual game itself more than like the intensity of that game. And I know it's an odd way of saying that, but this game, Breeze against Empire up at Trinity Health Stadium in Hartford, is likely going to be, we'll call it boring, because the DC Breeze have recorded, here's some fun stats for you. They've recorded 10 or fewer turnovers 3 times against the Empire since 2021. They lost all 3 of those games, including the one game when they had fewer turnovers, that being 9, than the Empire when they had just 10. So likely both of these teams, the Empire and the Breeze at this point in the season, will not make a lot of mistakes. And this a game that will be very intense, but on paper could be quite boring. And that stat, by the way, courtesy of Ultiworld's Charlie Eisenhood, who's also our great producer for the Empire home games. And the other stat I have for you, this is so interesting, about how good the East Division defenses have been this year. The East Division, 3 absurd scores against numbers. And there are a lot of factors that go into that, of course. The rules have changed over the years as well. But they're coming into 2024, where only 5 teams that ever had allowed less than 17 scores per game. The Hustle in 2023 at 16.9, the Breeze in 2021 at 16.7, the Empire in 2022 at 16.6, the Radicals in 2014 at 15.6, and the Empire in 2023 at 14.6. This season alone, there are 4 teams under 17 scores against per game. That is the Empire at 16.6, the Union at 16.5, the Breeze at 16.4, and the Glory at 14.4. And I think what that tells you is that 3 of those East Division teams, that being from them and then obviously the Union, but 3 of those teams markedly have understood that to survive in the East Division and to make yourself a favorite for the UFA title, you have not only got to keep hold of the disc yourself, but you have got to limit the other team and make them work for every opportunity. Where even if you're giving up scores in different ways, as long as you give pressure and defensive pressure, I'd say, for the entire length of the game, you keep yourself in every game by keeping those scores low.
That's that patience we were talking about, both on offense and then seeing if the other team can match that patience with their offense. Yeah, and that was a New York trait dating back a while. I felt like we always played fewer O points because our defense would just, hog up a lot of the time on the field. It took teams a long time to score against us historically. And yeah, you harken back to Madison in the early days. That zone I always wanted to play against it. It always looked formidable, but as a handler, I always wanted to kind of give it a shot and see how tough it really was with all that space on a big field back in the day when teams certainly didn't understand all the spacing or you didn't have as much practice against it. Yeah.
Well, those handlers back in the day were pretty useful. Do you think, or you probably know this, did you have more or less than 100 turnovers in your career?
Ooh, good question. I will say less. I'm going to look it up.
By how much? I already looked it up.
Oh, you already looked it up. Oh, you know. Oh,
it's
okay. Let me think. All right. I think I had somewhere around, I know I was just under 100 goals scored. Did I throw like 120-ish assists? Is that right?
You only threw 98 assists.
Sorry, maybe it was the assists I was thinking of. All right, well, are you checking with where you add the playoffs in? Those stat pages are a little wonky. Okay.
No,
all right.
Got it.
All right. Just checking. That's fine.
74 goals. Yep.
Yeah, no, I definitely threw fewer turns. I would say, let me think,
Yep.
20, 40. I probably threw about 75, 80.
Yeah, 82. That's reasonable.
Okay, yeah.
82 is for you. Yeah, so again, anyway, it was that kind of taking care of the disc in the past that were very helpful. And I should have looked up some of the other teammates as well, see how many turnovers they had. But at this point, though, I think that means it's time to wrap it up if we're going into the stat book and the archives on turnovers. Because again, I don't expect to see many for the Empire against the Breeze, which I will once again reiterate is going to be a showdown with, especially looking at these 20s, pretty much everybody is fit and healthy and ready to go and raring to go. And that is going to be at least what I can guarantee, turnovers or not, or excitement of the game or not, and highlights, whatever. It is going to be a playoff atmosphere at Trinity Health Stadium in Hartford, Connecticut, Saturday, July 20th. That is this Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So that is 6 p.m., not 7 p.m., 6 p.m. up in Hartford, Connecticut, Trinity Health Stadium. As I said, there is the 1 seed up for grabs because Montreal and, Toronto, again, could make this really, really fun and interesting if they upset Boston on Saturday, of course. But more likely, no disrespect to the Rush, it'll be 1 o'clock on Sunday. The Empire and the Breeze will already know whether or not they're fighting for the 1 seed or the 2 and the 3 seeds, because no matter what, that game between DC and the Empire will likely decide which team will have a playoff home game, because that is certainly not decided and will be decided in that game, regardless of any other factors. So the Empire know what they have to do. The Breeze know what they have to do. And that is 6 p.m. Trinity Health Stadium in Hartford, Connecticut. And as always, Matt, thanks so much for what is the second to last regular season podcast we have. And then certainly it's on to the playoffs and all that stuff. And so whether it's in the regular season or in the playoffs, we will see you again, 6 p.m. Trinity Health Stadium in Hartford, Connecticut. We'll see you there.
I'm excited to see the fireworks for those last D-liners trying to get their last licks in before they they make the 20 or not. See if, final impressions to see if they can get on those playoff rosters. Maybe it won't be as boring as we think.
Yeah, you and I still have to fight for our playoff rosters too. So we'll have a post-mortem after this one. All right, let's get out of here.